Today's session is a little bit different in that we had a request come in from one of our interest group members asking if we might be able to pull together a panel or a group of folks to really talk about their job search process. In that, as you can imagine, this was somebody who was going to be graduating and just wanted to hear about folks who perhaps are trained in community psychology or other related fields or just align with community psychology values to some degree and are now perhaps working in a range of different environments. So what it was like to really navigate and determine kind of their own identity as a community psychologist or otherwise, and how they ended up kind of in their current position and what that job search process was really like. So today I will be acting as moderator, but I'm also going to answer some questions to participate on the panel. So I am Jess Shaw. I graduated from Michigan State University in 2014. After leaving Michigan State University, I went and worked for the National Institute of Justice, which is the research and evaluation arm of the U.S. Department of Justice, for a year as a visiting fellow there. And now I'm an assistant professor in the Boston College School of Social Work, having been at BC for a little over 2 years now, that's right, a little over 2 years now. Kendall is another one of our panelists. Kendall, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Kendall Andrade. I graduated from NC State University last year, and so this is my first year as an assistant professor of psychology at Penn State Harrisburg. In our psychology program, we have a community psych and some other programs that I'm kind of in joint appointment in multiple programs, but I'm assuming we'll get to that later and kind of what all that looks like.
Great. Kate, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Kate Cavanaugh. My degree is not in community psychology, it's in developmental psychology, but I went to UC Irvine, which their psychology department is housed within the School of Social Ecology, which is a related field or aligned with community psychology. So I'm involved with a lot of community psychologists. I graduated in 2016 in the spring, and then that fall started a position that I'm currently in as an assistant professor in the School of Criminal Justice at Michigan State University. Like Kendall, I have an adjunct appointment in the psychology department, so I kind of have multiple feet in multiple departments, but my primary appointment is in the School of Criminal Justice.
Thanks, Kate. And Val?
Hey everyone, I'm Valerie Anderson. I am an assistant professor in the School of Criminal Justice at the University of Cincinnati. I did my PhD in community psychology at Michigan State University. And I graduated in 2015, and I did a one-year postdoc fellowship at Indiana University School of Medicine for that 2015-2016 academic year. And then in the fall of 2016, I joined the faculty here in criminal justice at UC. So I'm happy to talk about my experience both looking for postdocs when I was in grad school, as well as my experience looking for faculty positions as well.
Great. Christine, would you like to introduce yourself? And particularly if there's anything you're really hoping to gain from today's call, that would be helpful.
Sure. Can you all hear me first off?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Christine. I'm the one who reached out to Jessica about having this, so I'm kind of thrilled that it is a small group today so I can ask you all of my questions. I'm a fourth-year PhD student at North Carolina State University, getting ready to start the job search, probably looking at a postdoc year before going on, so I'd love to hear more about that. I'm just really interested in how you identified positions that would let you carry on with your identity as a community psychologist while also doing criminal justice research.
Great. Thanks, Christine, and thanks for organizing us, really, that you were the catalyst for this. Mackenzie, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us what you're hoping to gain from the call?
Sure. So my name is Mackenzie. I'm a second-year student at Michigan State. So I am pretty far from the job search at this point, but I just think it's helpful to gain as much information about that process as possible, even if it's a little bit early. So I don't really have a lot of specific questions for the panel, but more just wanted to sort of hop on the call and pick up some early information. And I will have to hop off the call a bit early, so if you see me take off, I apologize.
Great, thanks so much. So before jumping into, I have a set of questions that I had sent out to folks who are on the call today. But before hopping into those, I think it might be helpful to give each one of the panelists just a moment to orient us a bit to your job search process overall. So not necessarily having to delve into all the details, but kind of just how you approached the job search process, or what kinds of jobs you were looking for, and things like that. So Val, do you want to start for us?
Sure. So when I was working on my dissertation, I knew I wasn't 100% ready to look for a faculty position, even though I knew that that was ultimately what I wanted to do. So I was looking for postdoc positions. And in terms of kind of where I was looking for anyone that was I do research primarily around youth involved in the juvenile justice system, and gender and crime kind of broadly. So I was really looking for a position where I could do continue the research, that I was doing. And I ended up applying for a few different postdoc positions. They were all in medical schools. And I ended up at Indiana University School of Medicine, because the faculty member there was doing research that was really in line with kind of what my research interests were. And then when I was on the job market for a faculty position, I was actually going to be looking for a community psych position. Was kind of as a community psychologist, that was ideal for me and kind of what I was planning on doing. But the year that I was on the job market, there were literally no community psych positions open. So with that, I kind of expanded my search. I was like, well, maybe I'll look in public health and criminal justice, or things that are a little bit, that still would align with, what my interests are. And so I kind of began my search that way and ended up in a school of criminal justice, which has worked out nicely for me.
Great, thanks. Kate?
Yeah, so I went on the job market thinking that I probably wouldn't get a faculty position, but it didn't hurt to try, and then intending to apply for postdocs once the academic market season was over. So I did happen to get a job, so I never applied for postdocs. In thinking about which jobs to apply for, I was interested in psychology programs or criminology programs because I really felt that my area of research was nicely at that nexus, so I was open to either program. However, through the course of looking at what was available, just as everyone knows, the job market is a crapshoot year to year, and in psychology, there just wasn't a lot that seemed as though it would be supportive of my research or my interests. I did go on a couple of interviews at psych departments, and I could tell that it wasn't a good fit. I could tell that they didn't really get what I was doing. So for me, it was not a hard decision to take this position that I'm currently in a criminal justice department, because it just felt like much closer to the sort of research I want to do, even though it was outside the traditional discipline in which my degree is held.
Kendall?
Sure. So I kind of had the same approach, I think, that it sounds like Kate had, in terms of I applied for both faculty positions and postdoc positions. I was in kind of had the additional factor that I was considering when applying was I was about 8 or 9 months pregnant when I went on all my interviews. And so I was considering also kind of the dynamics of what that would look like. So I was hoping to be able to find a faculty position that worked, just because I didn't want to have kind of up and move my family for a year or two for a short postdoc position and relocate. Did interview for and considered some postdocs, but this ended up working well. But along the lines that everyone else has mentioned, applied for kind of broadly looking at psychology, criminal justice, criminology, social work, public health, kind of the whole broad span, trying to find something that seemed to be a good fit for my research and my interests.
Great. And when I was on the job market or beginning to apply, I remember kind of grappling with this idea of if I wanted to go academic or applied. I think that's how some folks within community psychology and really within other fields tend to talk about this. Like, do you want to go academic or do you want to go applied? And I had kind of a difficult time of drawing a firm line in the sand, just because the way in which I've been trained, all of the research I was doing within an academic setting was applied. It was always in partnership with community organizations and community members and policymakers and practitioners. So I didn't really draw a firm line in the sand for my job search. I kind of cast a wide net in looking for places that would understand the kind of work that I did and be supportive of it. So wanting to do community-based, frequently place-based research in partnership with policymakers and practitioners that has the potential to make broader potential policy level types of change. So I know I didn't want to go somewhere where they were expecting me to churn out 10 publications from working with an undergraduate subject pool, for example, in my first year, just because that's not the kind of work that I do. So I was looking for, I think, a lot of kind of academic type positions, knowing the flexibility I had in them, but not having a firm line between academic and applied. And then I also ended up applying for the National Institute of Justice, had this, what they called Translational Criminology Fellowship. It was the only one it was the first time they had it. And so I decided to kind of throw my hat in the ring for that as well. That wasn't framed as a postdoc. I think they would have taken anyone at any level. But for me, I ended up going there for a year first and then taking my first academic position after that. I landed in a school of social work, not necessarily because I was looking for a school of social work compared to other potential settings, but really because they had a job listing in which they were looking for someone who does gender-based violence research. So that's what made me apply to that position. So it wasn't kind of putting these things into buckets of I want to be in a psychology program or a CJ program, or I want to be academic, or I want to be applied. It was more, I knew what kind of work I wanted to do, and so then was really looking for context that would enable me to do that type of work. I think pretty similar to what other folks have already described. So from here, we can turn to the list of questions that we have, but I think before we do that, given we have a small group on the call today, I want to just pause and see if a couple people we have on the line have any specific questions that just kind of generated organically for you as we were speaking, or things that you want to kind of probe on based on some of the stuff you've heard from our panelists so far. So I want to pause for a minute, see if folks have any questions that popped up. Otherwise, we'll turn to our list of questions.
Hey, this is Christine. I have a question.
Sure.
So I'm really interested in the fact that you've landed at all different types of departments outside of psychology, and I was curious about how you took on aligning yourself and your research and your training with those different departments, and if you felt at all to sell yourself or your experiences in the job interview process, and just how you made that work.
I have a response to this, but I want to pause first and see if any of our panelists, if this speaks to them and something they want to jump in on.
I can share. So this is Kate. So for me, when I was on the market, when I was doing my interviews, I was very clear about what my research was. And so when I interviewed in psych departments, I was very clear that it was a lot of criminal justice research. And when I interviewed for criminal justice programs, I was very clear that it was a lot of psychology research. And when I got to the point at the job search where I was fielding offers, I kind of reiterated that. And it's really important to have a conversation with the department chair or the director of the school that thinks through what this will look like for you in terms of getting tenure. So when I was negotiating for the job I currently have, I said, listen, I like this criminal justice department. Even though my training is in psychology, I'm going to continue to identify as a psychologist. I'm going to continue to go to all of the meetings that I've always gone to, the conferences that I've always gone to. I'm going to continue to publish in the journals that I've been publishing in. Will that be a problem for me for tenure? Do I need to be going to criminal justice conferences and publishing in criminal justice journals? And I'm fortunate that the answer for me was no. That's not true at every department. Some departments will say the expectation here is that you are attending our meetings and attending or publishing in our journals. However, what I liked about the position that I took is that they were very open to that interdisciplinarity. So that's something that you're going to want to be extremely explicit about. Not just saying, well, my training's in this, but I'm happy to join your department, saying like, this is how I plan to identify. This is how I plan to market myself as an academic moving forward. This is where I plan to publish. These are the people, who I will be asking for letters for tenure from. Being really, really explicit about that as early as possible is going to benefit you in the long run. It's good for the department to know that, and it's good for you to see if it'll be a good fit for you that way.
I agree. This is Valerie. I agree with a lot. In my experience has been, I think, pretty similar, probably to Kate's experience being trained as a psychologist, but being in a school of criminal justice. And I do think you can be really explicit about, not only about your research being a good fit, but also your values. Like, for example, even when I was giving my job talk, I kind of talked in general about my own kind of guiding, like, values and things that guide my research program, and having a social justice orientation and things that are important to me to also get a sense of, whether or not, is this going to freak people out? Is this going to be, because coming from a community psych program, in many ways, what I've kind of learned moving out of a community psych program is that it was a little insulated with a lot of people that kind of thought about social issues and thought about the justice system in very similar ways that I did, and then kind of having to expand and kind of push your boundaries a little bit. But I think that, like Kate was saying, I think that you can be really explicit about your own values in the context of the work that you do early on, and you can in job interviews, in your job talk, as you're talking about your research and in your interview kind of process. So I would really encourage that, because you might get a sense that it might not be, a good fit in terms of your own kind of values and the work that you're trying to do. So that's my 2 cents on that.
I can comment just briefly. I think I'm actually in a psychology position, or in a psychology department, so a little bit different in terms of that. But I applied for, positions in other programs, but even I think presenting myself to psychologist was a little bit challenging in some ways. So across different interviews that I did, because some people just aren't as exposed to community psychology or don't have as much knowledge about it. But I also came from an applied social and community program, so I had both of those, and then throw in the criminal justice piece, and had to think really intentionally about how do I present my work in a way that people who, like you were saying, aren't exposed to it can really understand it, and understand how it's interdisciplinary and the different working pieces there, even to other psychologists who maybe aren't familiar with really what is community psychology, what are the values, what is it that we do. So not taking for granted that just because it was a psychology position that they would necessarily understand or have that framework to reference.
I think the only thing I would add to what my colleagues have said thus far is that those conversations are important to have early on, and to also hear perspectives of your potential future colleagues as well. So I'm in a school of social work, and when I first interviewed here, I had some of those initial conversations really kind of with the dean and with leadership, and really heard we want to be an interdisciplinary school. We have lots of folks who are across various disciplines who are here, but the extent to which that mindset and that vision for the school was shared across everyone within it definitely differed. So then after coming here, I heard lots of different kind of perspectives, and especially within social work. We sometimes have folks who very strongly identify as social workers and think about how critical it is to have social workers training the upcoming generation of social workers, right? Which makes sense. So across the school, there wasn't kind of this shared articulated vision around the value added of having folks from different disciplines. And that's something that I've been more exposed to and learned more since my time in coming here. So I think that part of it is you can have those conversations up front, and there's still the potential you're going to learn new things once you decide to take the position, if you decide to take the position. But a way to kind of get at that a bit, if you can in the beginning, is when you do have the opportunity to meet with faculty, so not just folks in leadership, but just faculty, trying to get a sense of what is the culture here. How do folks interact with one another, and what do people think about having people from an array of disciplines really contributing and being in the same circles running together. I have, since being in a school of social work, I go to social work conferences. I'd never gone to a social work conference before. I published in social work journals. I had not published in social work journals before. and that was something that in where I am, that's important, that you're making contributions to your own discipline in the way that you're trained, but also that you are contributing to social work as a discipline, as a field, that you're showing up and participating in those things. So I have shifted a bit. It doesn't mean I'm not publishing in the same place as I was before. What I tend to do is I'll publish perhaps original empirical work in one journal and then talk more specifically about implications for social work practice and send that to a social work journal. So there are ways to get one of my mentors, one of the folks at Michigan State, a guy named Bill Davidson, used to talk about twofers, right? The 2 for 1. So I think it doesn't necessarily mean you're doing brand new things you weren't before, but thinking about how can I have a 2 for 1? How can I make sure that I am both contributing to the fields I want to contribute to and these new disciplines I might find myself in. Okay, so I think from that, we'll turn to some of the questions that we received from folks ahead of time to continue our conversation. And what we'll do for each of these is I'll read the question and then I'll kind of invite one of our panelists to respond. And then after that, if other panelists have something novel they'd like to add, please do chime in. Otherwise, I don't think we necessarily need each panelist to respond to each question, just in the spirit of time and making sure we cover the pieces we want to. So the first question on here is, what types of jobs are available for folks with a PhD? And is a postdoc really necessary? Valerie, since you did go the postdoc route, do you want to talk to us about that experience?
Yeah, I think that a postdoc is not necessary, but I think that kind of depending on, where you're at, kind of in finishing up school, finishing your dissertation, and in kind of the job search process, like I think that postdocs are a good option if you're looking to either A, get a little bit more time in order to get some more publications out, B, get a little bit more kind of research training in kind of a focused area, C, expand your network of folks that you're working with, or kind of all of the above. I decided to apply for postdocs primarily because I was a little bit uncertain about some stuff that was going on with my dissertation research. So for me, the timeline around like, can I actually, I would 100% be ready to go for a faculty position in the fall, given where I was at with my dissertation research. I felt that doing a postdoc, and there was a little more flexibility in terms of a start date with the postdoc positions that I was looking at. That seemed to be kind of the best fit at that point in time. And I also was hoping to get a few more papers kind of out and under review before I went on the academic job market for a tenure track position. So no, it's not necessary, but I had a really good experience in my postdoc. And I would, as for most of them are 1 or 2 year positions. And I think if you can, expand your research network and be doing work that's relevant to your research agenda and your career goals, I can't say enough positive things about doing a postdoc.
Kate or Kendall, did you want to jump in at all? Okay, great. The next question, and for my panelists, so I kind of reordered some of these questions. They don't exactly align with what I sent to you ahead of time, but to kind of break it up into looking for jobs, interviewing, negotiating, and accepting. So they've been tweaked a little bit if you're looking at our list. The second question, I think Kate will go to you, knowing that you're at a very big research one. Are there certain jobs that are better suited for individuals who strive for work-life balance?
That is a great question. I don't know if I can give you a great answer. So I, unlike probably many people who are listening to this, I'm not a parent. And so I cannot speak to what it is like to be at an R1 and have children, because that's not the situation that I'm in. However, that's not to say that I don't have a life. So I think work-life balance is very possible. You just have to make sure that you are being productive with your time. So I know that that's something that I struggled with a lot in grad school, and I had to whip myself into shape as a faculty member. So in grad school, I'd wake up late. Maybe I'm watching something on Netflix while I'm making lunch, and then it's 3 o'clock, and then I'm like working till all hours of the night. And if that sounds familiar to you, then you are not alone. So that was very much my working style in graduate school. And I think that when I got to my faculty position, I realized that was no longer tenable because it is very busy. So I made a promise to myself that my working hours would be busy, devoted working hours. So I make a concerted attempt to work from 9 to 5, Monday through Wednesday, not on the weekends, not after 5. Of course, there are always exceptions, but I make a concerted effort to do that. And the reason for that is to maintain that work-life balance. Part of what I've found that makes it easier is I used to always forward all my emails to my Gmail account, so I would get emails all the time, and now I don't. I only check my work emails from 9 to 5 while I'm at work. And it's been difficult for me to kind of make that transition just because those 9 to 5 hours need to be fully productive hours. And so I think that for me, that was something I really had to train myself to do in the first year of this position, but it certainly paid dividends. Now I'm better at it now that I have some practice. And so I feel much more equipped to handle that work-life balance stuff. My passion is traveling. I love traveling. I love going on trips and vacations and learning new things. My husband's job is very much a position where he's traveling all the time. And so I have not found that I've had to make any sacrifices, even being, a young faculty member that's an assistant professor trying to get tenure at this big R1. I have not had any problem maintaining that aspect of my lifestyle, where I can go on trips with my husband if I want to, or where I can, go away for the weekend or do something fun after work hours. So my best advice for work-life balance is making sure that your working hours are actually productive hours and concentrating your working hours into a situation that works best for you. For me, it's Monday to Wednesday, 9 to 5. Maybe that's not what's best for you, but just make sure that your working hours are actually productive hours, because you'll find that you free up a lot of time that way. I know it feels like, oh, we're so busy all the time, but if you make sure your working hours are productive, you'll notice that you have more time than you thought.
Kendall or Valerie, do you want to add to that at all?
So I think email might be like the death of all of us. So one strategy in terms of just like email life balance is that I've used, and I've actually used since I was in grad school, is I actually don't push emails to my phone. So like also like check emails. Like I like Kate's strategy around just like having like a normal like work day of like, these are the hours I do work related emails and stuff. But I actually just don't, when I travel, I actually delete the mail app off my phone. So if I'm like going somewhere for fun, so I recommend doing that to anyone. And then when any day, I only will check my email if I want to go check my email. So I'm not like getting alerts on my phone, like so-and-so just emailed you, because then you really could be, if you're getting emails from students and from your colleagues and, paper rejected, and that can be all hours of the day. So it's also good to, I think, set some boundaries around that if you're able to. But that's worked for me.
I'll just add, so I have a little one who just turned 1 not too long ago, and so I've found trying to figure out the balance of having a small child and this being the first year has been very difficult, and I'm sure whether or not you have children, it's very difficult, as we're hearing from other people. But I found it very helpful just to be very honest with other coworkers here and colleagues about what that's like. So I think there tends to be kind of the culture of wanting to like pretend that we have it all under control, at least with some of the people that I interact with, but being very honest, like I went home and I didn't work this weekend, and that's okay. Like we've been kind of trying to encourage the culture of having that balance versus feeling like we need to be working all the time. And so that's been something that we've been trying to do. I'm not great at it. I stayed up really late last night grading papers, and so I'm not great at that. But I think that we've at least been trying to be more honest about ways that we can kind of keep each other accountable and be helpful about that in terms of maintaining that balance.
And the one thing I'll add to this is I think that, as all three of the other panelists have already described, is once you transition into a faculty position or whatever position you transition into, is you're constantly, hopefully, you're constantly developing new strategies that will enable you to be really productive when you need to be, as Kate was describing, like having those set hours of when you work and when you're productive. So I might find myself kind of implementing new strategies. One of the things I started doing more recently was I bought an actual paper schedule, which I had back in college, but then didn't have for a while. And I actually just start recording how I was spending my time during the workday. So even like 8 to 8:30 a.m. checked email, like something so I could just see how I was spending my time to make sure I was using the time productively, but also so at the end of the day, I could look at something and be like, oh, I actually did work a lot today, because many of the tasks that we're working on don't have immediate products. So we'll put a lot of time into something, and then we'll feel at the end of the day or the end of the week like we didn't get anything done. So that's helped me be able to hold something, like actually literally hold something in my hand and see I get things done. Because I think the transition, what Kate said resonated with me so much, because this transition happens, I think, from grad school to your real job, in that all the way up through when I finished my PhD, I was very task oriented, right? So I would know that there was a task I needed to complete. And I could start that task when I wanted, and maybe it would take me 1 hour, maybe it would take me 12 hours, but I would like start a day and say, okay, like today I need to complete this task. And that worked well in graduate school, because everything you're working towards is really a milestone, right? Like I'm gonna work really, really hard until I can defend my dissertation proposal, then I can take a breath. I'm gonna work really, really hard until I pass my comps, then I can take a breath. And so it's all very task oriented, right? Or certain milestones you have to hit. But then when you're in your real job, this is kind of it, right? Like this is just your life now, you're just working now. And so shifting from being more task oriented to really time oriented, as my colleagues on the panel have talked about, in designating like these are the times when I'm going to work, right? Like I'm going to work from 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, or I'm not going to work weekends. So making that transition, I think, was something that was really rough and bumpy for me, because I'd always been more task oriented than time oriented, but that can help in really striking that work-life balance. I want to pause again to see if any of the folks we have on the call have any questions that have come up that we can respond to before returning to our list.
I have a follow-up question to that one, and I recognize that this is a panel of academics, but I wonder if any of you can speak a little bit to, either from colleagues or other experiences, whether you feel like academia is particularly hard to strike that work-life balance, or sort of incentivizes not having work-life balance versus maybe a more applied position, because that's one of the things that I've been sort of considering in trying to choose between those.
So I can start. This is Jess. I know, Christine, you're on the phone, so we should do a better job. Kate was great at the beginning. Do a better job of saying who we are before we start speaking, in case you can't see us. So I think that, I mean, the classic psychology answer, right? It depends. I think that in academia, there is a bit more pressure to have the perception that you're constantly working, whether you are or not. Like, I think there is a culture around, like, it's the grind and you should always be working. Though I think in practice, and I'm speaking really from the time that I worked for the Department of Justice for a year. And so those were folks who were feds, right? They had the same sort of thing where, like, they had trouble putting email away. They had kind of trouble stepping away. They had trouble on the weekends. And so I think in that context, which I would think of it as more applied, those are not academics in that context, even though they're looking at supporting research and things, that they had that creep too and really had to strive for that work-life balance. I don't think it's quite the same as in academia, but I think it happens there too. I don't know if folks have other insight.
I had a comment about the previous question, not this one about there being differences. My personal experience, having been both academic and applied, is that there's really not a difference. The issue is how well you can do what was described about managing your own time and deciding when you're going to work and to be effective during that time. But I did want to put in a comment about being upfront about family obligations, particularly with children. I was having a conversation with a tenure track faculty member about that exact issue, and I did want to put a caution out there that you really do need to spend some time thinking about the culture of your department before you start discussing the demands of your personal life. Her experience was that if she had to attend a meeting via Zoom because she had a sick child that she had to pick up at the school, and she told them that I'm attending via Zoom because my infant was sick, that there were people in the department that that negatively impacted their view of her. So our discussion was just don't tell them. Don't tell them why. Everyone attends meetings via Zoom sometimes, and you don't need to explain why. So you may be in a department where they're incredibly supportive of those family life balance issues, and you may be in a department in which they're not, or where one or two powerful people are not. So I would just caution, and I don't think that this is just academia, I think it's anywhere. I would make sure that you have a really good read of your colleagues. And if they are supportive of family life balance, and this isn't just infants, it's also caretaking for any family member. If they are supportive, that's great. But if some of them are not, and particularly if one or two powerful people are not, then don't tell them. Just say, this is what I'm doing today. Okay, bye. And leave it at that. So I just did want to throw that out there to just, analyze the environment first before you assume that people are going to be supportive of those things.
Thank you so much, Jean, for chiming in with that. I think that is something so critical. And I can think about even in a very early career, but I can think across the different contexts I've been in. And they are very different cultures in regards to those different pieces. Okay, so the next question we have on our list is, where did you look for job postings? And were any particularly more helpful than others? Kendall, would you like to respond to that one? You're muted.
Is that okay? There we go. Sorry about that. So I basically subscribed to a lot of the different kind of online forums that are there. So like Higher Ed Jobs was one that I used a lot. Academic Jobs Online, those sorts of things where I could go in and put specific criteria, kind of filter, and then I would get either a weekly email or a daily email with positions that were posted. So those were kind of the primary source I used in combination with listservs, so the SCRAW listserv, other division listservs. And then I did a lot of targeted searches, so universities that I knew of in areas that I might be interested in, just going on their websites and seeing if anything was posted that hadn't made it to one of these other sources. So I kind of took a broad approach using a couple of different techniques to see what I could find. Most of those were focused more on academic positions, though. I didn't apply to as many postdocs, so I think listservs might be better for looking at postdocs. I'm not sure, that wasn't the approach I took as much, so maybe someone else could speak to that a little bit better.
Kate, you're muted.
Geez, I made the same mistake. So it's Kate. When I was looking at postdocs, for me, I was looking for word of mouth type of postdocs. There were a couple of faculty members that I wanted to postdoc with that were good friends with my advisor. So I didn't do much searching for postdocs. I also didn't end up applying to any. But my impression is that is pretty typical, that a lot of postdocs are kind of more word of mouth, talking to somebody at a conference, networking through your advisor, etc. Whereas the academic jobs, I would agree with the approaches that Kendall was talking about.
I applied for a few postdocs, and I did a postdoc, and I think that both of them came across listservs. I found both of them or some web-based searching. So and then I just contacted like the PI on the grant directly for the postdoc that I ended up getting. So yeah, I think listservs, if you're looking for positions in criminal justice, since this is a criminal justice interest group, the American Society of Criminology has a really good like job board, or they post like every ad for all of the current positions, and that's for applied work, for faculty positions, if there's postdocs available. So I would check out ASC's website and their employment section, because that is pretty, they keep that pretty up to date for like job ads that come out for CJ jobs.
Great. So the next question that we have, and I think we'll have each panelist respond to this one, but do it in a very kind of abbreviated way. What advice would you give a graduate who is ABD and beginning to search for jobs? So if you have just a few sentences of advice that you would give. I think the advice that I would give is, one, knowing that the job search process is kind of a full-time job. It really takes a lot of time to put together your application materials. So just planning for that, knowing it's going to take a good amount of time to pull all your stuff together. And the second piece of advice I think I would give is that applying for a job does not mean you are accepting that position. So know what might be deal breakers for you, things that if it's a position you absolutely would not want, but if it's something that piques your interest that you might be interested in, you can go ahead and send in your application materials, because applying doesn't mean they're going to want to interview you, doesn't mean you're going to get an offer, doesn't mean you're going to accept it.
Yeah, I would add to that, be honest about what you are looking for. I know that it feels super panicky as you're reaching the end of your grad school, your time in grad school, and you're trying to figure out, like, oh my gosh, I spent all this time building toward this, and now what's the next step? But you're a little fledgling that has to fly on your own. Be honest with yourself about what it is that you want. I have friends who went non-academic route, academic route, teaching, research focused. I have friends who did all of those things, and for all of them, sometimes it was a lot of soul searching. So make sure that you've really thought through what you want your life to look like, and it's okay to be honest about those things. It's okay to be geographically limited. A lot of times, at least other people have had the experience of feeling as though they are shooting themselves in the foot if they have a geographical limitation or have some other limitation that focuses their job search a little more narrowly than they would like. But that's okay. This is your life. Your career is one portion of your life, but it certainly isn't all of your life. So I think that would be my advice.
Mine is very kind of attaches on to that well. Is I think early on in the process, I was very focused on needing to sell myself without also realizing that I also, in some ways, the positions are selling themselves to me, right? To figure out if it's going to be a good fit. And that's a decision I have to make, not just being like, yes, I can teach that course, even if I have no idea what it's like, right? So being willing to kind of be very straightforward about what you're wanting and really ask hard questions to figure out if it's going to be a good fit or not.
I think my only kind of like bit of advice would be to start getting, and this kind of goes off a little bit of what Jess said, was just to get your materials kind of like organized. As soon as you know you're going to probably be on the job market, or the year, that you're going to be going on the job market, I would say start organizing, your research statement, your teaching statement, those kinds of things. Use your networks and ask people to see kind of what they've submitted and what they've done, people who've been successful in getting the kind of job that you're interested in. And to that end too, I would also say that if you're applying for an academic job, there might be a very short window of time between when the search committee chair calls you and wants to invite you to the campus, and from that point in time to when you actually are doing your campus invite. Like I only had about maybe less than 2 weeks kind of advance notice before I came here actually and gave my job talk here. So I would say start getting all of that kind of stuff organized kind of well in advance so that you're, well prepared and ready to go, because you could get a call and be like, hey, can you come here, next week and interview and give a talk. So I'd say get your materials organized, as soon as you can when you know you're going to be going on the market.
To you folks on the line, we're going to transition from talking about kind of the job search process, looking for jobs, talk more about interviewing. Do folks have any questions about the job search before we move forward?
Christine, I have a question. I'm wondering if any of the panelists were interested in non-academic careers, and if they could talk a little bit about the differences in applying or getting ready to apply for academic careers or non-academic, and then what made you all decide to go into academia.
I guess I can quickly answer that. This is Valerie. I have always wanted an academic career, so I don't really know or at least I didn't, yeah. So for me, I always was planning on an academic career, so I don't necessarily know if I can like differentiate that or respond to that. So that's just me.
This is Jess. I was not making as firm a distinction between going academic or going a more applied route, so a place like Urban Institute or kind of like these big research think tanks. I knew if I went to one of those, I wanted it to be a place that was theoretically driven, that it wasn't just kind of churning out evaluations and research, but kind of had used theory in the way in which they approach the work, and also had similar values and the ways of thinking about the work. But when it came time to actually applying for those positions, I think where there was some difference was in terms of what projects I kind of showcased in my application materials, and even in who my letter writers were. So for some of the more applied positions that I was applying for, or there were some positions that were like in academia, but I wouldn't have been somebody who had my own program of research, right? So for example, working within a psychology department as like the community liaison, so like helping connect faculty to community members. So it wasn't an academic setting, but a bit different. Like I had letter writers from some of my community partners. So kind of the package I pulled together looked a little bit different depending on what I was trying to speak to and what I was trying to showcase. Kate Kendall, is there anything you would add?
No, I was always kind of on the academic job track, so I don't have much to add. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm on the same path, so I didn't have anything.
All right. So in transitioning to talk more about interviewing, Val, we'll start with you again. Could you talk a little bit about just preparing for, and you started talking about this a little bit in terms of having not much time between when they contact you and say come for a campus visit and when you're there on campus. So how did you prepare for that campus visit for the job interview?
I practiced my job. I put together my job talk and I practiced my job talk for like weeks and weeks in advance. I would say like that's probably the most, at least for an academic position, at a research intensive university, that's really, probably the most important aspect of, your on-campus visit, at least from kind of their perspective of evaluating you. So I would say in terms of preparing, that was probably the number one thing that I did. I also, did a little background research on kind of, they'll send you an itinerary, of who you're going to be meeting with. So making sure that you kind of know who people are that you're going to meet with, have, a list of questions prepared in advance for sure that you'd want to ask, the department chair, if you're meeting with the dean, and definitely and also like other kind of junior faculty and asking questions about like, what is it like to live, fill in the blank if it's somewhere you've never been. So I think, having questions not only about kind of the actual position, but also questions just about kind of like, what do you do for fun and what is your life like here? And yeah, so I would say kind of be as kind of prepared in advance for at least your job talk. And then also kind of put together questions that, are important to you. Cause like I think Kendall mentioned this, like you're also evaluating them as much as they're evaluating you in this process. So that's also something, even though it's nerve-wracking, it's something I think that's important to kind of keep in perspective, that you want to make sure that it's a good fit for you as well.
I would just add to that. So I'm a very introverted person. And so the interview process is normally a day or two or, and it's pretty much nonstop the entire time was my experience. So, from the minute I landed from the airplane, going out to dinner with the search committee and then started again the next morning and interview after interview. And so there wasn't really a lot of kind of downtime for me to recuperate kind of as more of an introverted person who doesn't enjoy or do as well in those nonstop settings like that. And so just really trying to brace yourself and kind of be prepared for that if that's something that is not really your setting that you are used to or is comfortable in. So really being prepared that it's kind of 48 hours nonstop of being presenting yourself as a candidate in that situation.
Kate, what do you wish you'd known before interviewing?
I think Kendall's point is super well taken that it's a really busy day. I think I imagined myself having more downtime in the day. So I'm sure that you've heard before that it's really good to be prepared for each of the meetings that you will be in. So if you're meeting with 10 different faculty, to look up those 10 faculty members, make sure you're familiar with their work, etc. So I made myself a really elaborate spreadsheet of the people I was going to meet with and their research interests and questions I was going to ask them. And so my plan was, in all of my downtime, I was going to be referencing that sheet and just come up with these brilliant questions, and there is not time for that. So I was not prepared for how busy it would be. I had a breakfast meeting. Oh yeah, all the meals, by the way, are still interviews. So I would have a breakfast meeting at 8 o'clock, meetings all day, a lunch meeting, meetings all afternoon, and then a dinner meeting that would go till maybe 9 or 10 p.m. sometimes. So, I mean, it's a 12 to 14 hour day where there are no breaks in between. Sometimes they even as their one faculty member is taking you to meet with the next faculty member, they'll still be kind of asking you questions. So it's not even in the hallway you have a chance to get your mind together. The way to combat that is to ask to go to the bathroom. The person that you're talking to does not know if you just asked to go to the bathroom with the last person. So it is something that you can find a workaround for, but I was not prepared for just how nonstop and busy the time was.
Val or Kendall, things you wish you knew before you went to interview?
I had one of my colleagues actually sent me a list of just tips. And just things like bring a water bottle with you, have your own refillable water bottle that you can have with you. Wear comfortable shoes, things that are probably obvious, but those would be the kinds of things practical things that I think that are also important. And I also would just echo the statements around it being a very long day. And I also use the bathroom break strategy with all of my meetings as well, just to get a few seconds to yourself to kind of take a deep breath. Go with some water, rest for a second. So yeah.
The one thing I wish I knew before my first interview, and I did this before I went on my couple other interviews I went on, but after the first one, is I think that I know that I could have done a better job in that first interview in how I framed and thought about questions for them, right? So I asked questions about what is the teaching load here? What is work-life balance? Right? All these questions that they probably expected, but also that were just giving information to me, they gave me something, but weren't necessarily modeling for my potential future colleagues, I was going to be a good colleague, right? So wanting to ask questions. So instead of just asking about kind of what's work-life balance, what's the teaching load, those are all questions about kind of what do I get or what's my experience going to be like here, but instead kind of asking questions about what sorts of initiatives are happening here, or I saw that you study something in this area, I've been thinking about something in this area, I wonder if a collaboration might be. So they should be real and genuine questions that you have, but I think thinking about the way in which you ask those questions as an opportunity to model how you might interact with your colleagues were you to end up going there. And I think that's something, I used to actually train people how to go on interviews, and that's something I used to train them on, right? That when you go on interviews, the questions you ask, you want to make sure you're asking questions that show you've done your homework, that show that you're thinking about the organization, that show you're going to be a contributing member of that community. But for some reason, I totally forgot about that when I went on my first interview in the academic setting, and I was just asking these, I don't need to spend time asking what's your teaching load. I can look that up later or ask via an email. So that when you do have the chance to ask questions, really ask questions that you care about and that show you're looking forward to being a contributing member of that community, that you're going to be a good colleague were you invited there. So we just had a couple of questions kind of under this category of interviewing. Before we move forward and talk about negotiating and accepting the job, do you folks on the line have any other questions related to interviewing or the campus visit? And I think all of our panelists are fantastic and really acknowledging that there is a whole wealth of knowledge that we simply do not have as academics. So we are sad we don't have that perspective here on the panel. But any questions around interviewing that we can answer?
This is Mackenzie. I just wanted to hop on the line to say that I unfortunately have to take off, but I've really appreciated this discussion. It's been great to sort of get me thinking about some of these things as I move forward in the program. So thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Mackenzie, for joining us. All right, so we're going to transition and talk a little bit about negotiating and accepting the job. Kendall, let's start with you on this one. What questions should you ask during the negotiation process?
I feel like I'm probably a terrible person to answer this question because I don't think that I necessarily did a great job in doing this. But I think the main recommendation I'd gotten from someone that I did for myself was basically when I received a phone call for an offer, I didn't really ask any questions or really comment much. I was just like, okay, great, thank you. Let me have a little bit of time and I'll get back to you, because I needed time to collect my thoughts and to kind of see how I wanted to respond, rather than feeling like I needed to ask a bunch of questions immediately or start negotiating as soon as they mentioned, you know, what the salary was, or you know, different aspects of that. And so really taking a little bit of time to collect my thoughts, figure out how I was going to respond, and then get back to them with that was probably the best recommendation that someone gave me. I hope it worked out okay for me, but that was a strategy that I used.
Yeah, I completely agree. So I got a job offer and I was really excited, and I wanted the job, but I hadn't done any negotiating yet. And so I remember my advisor saying, you don't have to accept it today. It's not like they're going to take it away. But that's how it feels a little bit. It's like, oh, what if they take it all away from you? That is not possible and will not happen to you. You can, and people do negotiate for months. So don't feel as though you have to be pressured to not negotiate at all, or pressured to accept the first round of negotiations. Of course, departments will use strategies like saying, this is the deadline we need to know by. It's a fake deadline. Now that I've been on the other side of it, I know this for a fact. It is not a real deadline. You can just say no to the deadline. So don't be afraid to negotiate for several rounds. Don't be afraid to take your time, even if you don't have a lot left to negotiate about, but you are just trying to make a decision between one institution versus another one. It's okay. Take your time. This is about you. They've given you the job offer. And so don't frantically think that you have to accept the first offer or even the first round of negotiations that comes your way. I like Kendall's strategy of just saying, okay, thanks, and then not really discussing it further at all until you've had time to think it through.
I think one of the things, and this kind of ties into one of the questions we had of what do you wish you'd known before accepting the position, but I think as Kendall and Kate talk about like taking time to think about it, part of what you're really thinking about is what will enable you to be successful in that new position, and really thinking about what you need to be productive there. And I'm jumping the gun around what you wish you'd known before accepting a position, but I think what's hard is that we only get our PhD in one place, right? And some of us maybe do graduate work at different institutions, but that kind of becomes our understanding of what an academic institution looks like. So I trained somewhere where all graduate students have office space. I assumed that in my new institution, the graduate students who I hired to work with me on projects would have offices. That is something I did not ask. And that is not the case where I am, right? And so I took all these kind of working assumptions I had based on the program I had trained in and assumed some of those things would be the same case in the new institution I was going to. I asked about some of them, but there were some that I just didn't even think to ask because it seemed so fundamental of something that would just be in a program that I didn't think to ask about them. So I think really thinking through what are the pieces that I need to be successful in this new place, and not taking things for granted necessarily, to then have that informed questions you ask during the negotiation process as you consider if this is a place where you want to work or not. Valerie, the next question we have is negotiating pay or moving expenses appropriate?
My answer is yes. negotiating pay and moving expenses is appropriate. I don't know how much folks want me to elaborate on that, but pay is obviously one part of this broader like negotiation piece. When you get your offer, they'll give you, this is what the package is that we're offering you, and definitely ask for more than what is initially offered, and hopefully they'll come back with something a little higher, a little better, or whatever you're asking for. And then don't be afraid to ask again and push a little further. That can include things like summer stipend for your first number of years on faculty. This includes seed money, startup funds for your research program. It can include things like things for your office, computer, laptop, whatever kind of stuff that you might need. Obviously moving expenses, kind of how they're going to cover that. Will they give you a lump sum of money kind of upfront? Will they reimburse you? All of that kind of stuff can be part of it. Also, your teaching load, you can negotiate that, like course reductions. So you make a whole kind of list of stuff that that you are pieces to the job offer, and don't be afraid to ask for more or ask questions about any of those particular pieces, because this is your shot to do it. So I don't know, don't be afraid.
One of the things that was in my package here at Boston College, which I hadn't anticipated, which was nice, was also they gave me $10,000 towards the purchase of a home. Now, it's Boston, but the cost of living in Boston is exorbitant. So I joked that $10,000 would be a down payment on a tent here. So it's still kind of sitting with the university until I actually purchase something. I have not purchased something yet here, but I didn't expect that at all to be in a package. And so I think depending on where you go, packages can look a little bit different. Also, I think we have all women on our panel today, and just knowing the gender pay gap that we have, and that part of that is that we don't always ask for things. I did a terrible job negotiating. I did for my salary, I did all my homework ahead of time, and I think that's one of the things that's important, is to look at kind of what are folks who are in similar positions, what are they making, taking into consideration the cost of living. So I had kind of this whole Excel spreadsheet that looked at different salaries and what I was really expecting, really kind of had my bearings on what I was going to ask for. But the initial offer that they made to me was much, much higher than what I thought they were going to say. And I had zero justification or reasoning to ask for something more than the offer they gave me. Like, I was expecting them to say one number, I had justification for asking for more than that, and then what they offered was way more than what I was going to push them for. So I remember being on the phone, they told me the amount, and I said, okay, which is not what you're supposed to do. So I think doing your homework ahead of time to the best of your ability. I don't know, Kendall and Kate, did you have anything else to add to that, just around kind of negotiating and packages and all those things?
Yeah, so I love talking about negotiating. It's one of my favorite topics. So it feels really, at least it did for me, it feels really like personal and uncomfortable. My upbringing was such that you don't talk about money, and it felt as though I was sounding greedy somehow or being unreasonable. And so what you need to keep in mind is that negotiating is not personal. This is data-driven. It's not that you are asking your chair to personally give you money. All you're asking for is that the chair solicits more money from the dean, who solicits more money from the university. So this is not going to make you look bad to anybody that you're going to have to work with. It's not a personal thing at all. And I think that Jessica's point was really well taken, that you need to be able to kind of justify anything that you're asking for. And that's why now I like to think about negotiating as a data-driven process. So look at what are people paid at your level in comparable universities, in this university, in other departments at this university, et cetera, and come in with that data and say, listen, this university struggles such that women earn less than men. I'm a woman. I don't want to be part of that statistic. That's why I'm asking to be paid as much as these male colleagues in this spreadsheet. Or you can say, listen, this university is competing or is comparable to this other local university. However, look at how much they pay. I have it all listed in this spreadsheet. This is what you're offering me. That's why that's not going to work. So if you enter the situation with data and with facts to kind of back up what you're asking for, it helps me feel as though it was less of me being just a greedy money grubber who was being a jerk to my future chair. So any kind of strategies like that you can use to make it feel less personal, I think is often helpful. Remember that large state schools and other schools too, all of the information about everyone's salary is publicly available online. So you can easily look up what everyone else in your department is making. And so that's where you can get your data from. So that's my suggestion.
The one thing I can add is I did not do that specifically necessarily for salary, but I did for startup funds. So made a specific detailed spreadsheet as in, this is the equipment that I know I'm going to need, or these are the additional software packages, and kind of outline, this is one of the research studies that I hope to do in the first year and how much it would cost to run that. And so having a very detailed justification of why I needed certain startup funds to use in the first several years I was here. And so then I could present that to them in terms of how much or what that startup package should look like in terms of funding for research and those sorts of things.
Okay, the last question we have on our list, and then we will open it up in case folks on the line have any additional questions, is just, what do you wish you had known before accepting the position? Kate, do you want to get us started?
I think this is a hard one. I think I would have liked more information about kind of what is a day in the life at this institution. I loved what you said earlier, Jessica, that we only get our training from one, maybe two places. And so people have brought up asking, what do you do for fun around here? People have brought up asking kind of those lifestyle questions. But some of the other departmental cultural things that are really interesting that you don't think about are things like, do people usually work in their offices or work from home? So my department has very much, like most people, work from home. If they're in the office, usually their doors are shut or they're in a meeting. And that was not what it was like where I got my degree. Where I got my degree, everyone was in the office with their door open all day long. So when I got here, I was like, does everyone hate me? Is school canceled today? Is it a holiday that I don't know about? Because of some of those small departmental cultural things. It's not as though that would have changed my mind about accepting this job, but it also served, that mismatch served in making me feel really isolated the first month or so that I was here, because I thought there was something wrong with me. So I think I would have liked more information about what is a day in the life, not just what do you like to do for fun or what are the requirements for tenure, but kind of what does it look like on the day-to-day to be a member of this department? What is the tone and tenor of faculty meetings? So those more kind of departmental level cultural things I would have liked to know more about.
So mine is, we've already mentioned it, but I did not know that the deadline was a fake deadline. And so I felt like super pressured that I had like 4 days to make a decision, and was kind of going back and forth between offers. And so I did not know that. And it would have been very useful to know at the time, because it, would have, I think, changed the way that I negotiated, changed the types of questions I ask, and some of those sorts of things. So since then, I have learned that, and would have been good to know. But really knowing that I could take my time, and the importance of a decision that your job is not the only thing. But in my case, it changed my location. It changes the people that you work with. Can change the environment that you're in, and so it's an important decision that requires taking time to really think through and weigh all of the options.
I don't know if I necessarily have anything, like a specific thing that I can think of that I wish I would have known. But I mean, maybe just kind of like a bit of like a piece of advice would be, and this is kind of echoing kind of what my colleagues here have already kind of said, but, I think being open to that things might feel and be a little bit different than what you expect or what you're used to or what norms were from, previous institutions, and kind of just be, I think it's okay to feel like I don't really know like what I'm doing. I really felt like I still kind of feel like that, and it's my second year as a faculty member. But I think it's also okay to feel that way as well, that you don't necessarily know like what you're doing, and you're just kind of figuring it out in some ways kind of as you go. And also, I think if you can, like early on, try to find especially for an academic position, of like a mentor or somebody, you know, in your department or in your school or in your college, who, you know, might be able to give you a little bit of guidance and advice around things like, you know, applying for grants or, you know, prepping courses. And I think not to be afraid to, you know, to ask for help or ask for guidance, you know, as an assistant professor.
Great. So with our last about 15 minutes, I just wanted to open it up to the couple of folks that we have on the line to see what other questions you might have.
This is Christine. I have a question, and I'm not sure about the most strategic way to get the answer to this, so I think I'll defer to Jessica and how she thinks might be best with this. But I'm really curious about how you all feel about your current positions, and if that's something that you see yourselves staying in long term, or if you foresee maybe a career change in your future. If you're willing to speak about that here, or if you'd like to send me an email, anything like that would be very helpful.
This is Valerie. I love my job, and I want to keep my job.
Yeah, it's Kate. Me too.
So I think one of the things that might be helpful in responding to this question, because this can be a difficult question to answer in a public venue, is what sorts of things, so I mean, Val and Kate, you've already chimed in and said, I love my job. So if you could talk maybe about some of the things that have led you to that conclusion, like how you've arrived at, like, this is a good place for me. I see this as a place. One of the things I tell PhD students who I'm working with who are going on the job market is your first job does not have to be your forever job, right? Like, that's okay. And when something ends up perhaps not being the right place for you, is not necessarily reflection on you and your capabilities, nor reflection on the program, but it means there perhaps was not a good fit. And that's not bad, right? It's something that we can continue to look for what else might be a good fit instead. So perhaps if you can talk about what it is that makes you be able to say that so confidently, what kind of indicators are like, yes, this is where I want to be.
Yes, thank you for helping me reword that, Jessica. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Val, go ahead.
Okay, you go ahead. Okay. I think that finding a place where there's a few things. I think one, there's just a good like value fit. So as a community psychologist in a school of criminal justice, like I don't feel like my values as a community psychologist and what I care about. Like I feel like my school also supports kind of my agenda and the work that I do. So they're supportive of me, you know, going out and working with, I work with a lot of juvenile courts and, you know, spending a lot of my time out in the community and working with folks in court systems and agencies that are working with justice-involved youth. So I think just like the general kind of finding a place where that value fit is really important. I'm also in a school where there's a lot of like young faculty and younger faculty. So I also have like a good amount of friends here now as well. So that's also nice when you can become friends with people that you work with. We're like around the same age and like have some like hang out together. So that's also nice too, when people like that work together are also like friends with one another. That makes your job a little bit more fun, I think, as well. So those would be just a couple things I can think off the top of my head. And I think that, you know, obviously that since I'm at a research intensive university, that there's a lot of support for, I mean, basically any kind of thing within reason that I've like kind of proposed that I want to do. Like my department chair is super supportive of that. And there's always kind of someone around to collaborate with or help on a project or kind of brainstorm ideas. So for all of those reasons, I like my job.
I would agree. Those are all important reasons. For me, the primary thing is that I feel really supported by my department, and that manifests in a couple of different ways. I have a lot of friends in the department, like Valerie said, that really makes a big difference. But also my chair is such a champion for me and the work that I want to do. She is great about checking in. What do you need? How is this going? How's that going? And I have found that to be incredibly helpful. I also have a good thing going with the other assistant professors. I am the furthest from tenure of all of them. So they have been so kind and good about sharing with me the way that they organize their tenure materials or BC CCing me on emails so that I have a copy of the way they worded it. So things like that have just made me feel incredibly supported. I feel like everyone here wants me to succeed and everyone's like kind of pulling together to help me succeed in various ways. So that's what I appreciate about this department. I remember when I was on the job market, people were saying, well, you have to check the department culture, and I didn't really understand what that meant all the way. I was kind of like, yeah, I mean, if it's clearly a toxic culture, that's not good. But now I understand a little bit more. I think it's so incredibly important to be part of a department that supports you and values the work that you do and wants to help you move forward with the vision that you have for yourself as an academic or yourself as a researcher. So that is why I like my job.
And I'll just add for a minute. So I'm not at a R1, and so I have higher teaching loads, I imagine, than at a R1, and that's something I was looking for, right? I enjoy teaching, and that is the environment I was looking for, which I was thankfully able to find where I am. And so something that was really important to me, and I've had so far, is I am teaching classes that I really enjoy teaching, and I'm teaching. I'm teaching students who are both undergraduate students and master's students, and really have been able to have a lot of involvement in both like shaping the content of the courses and what that looks like, and which classes I'm going to be teaching. And so that's something that was very important to me, and I've had the ability to do that here. So that was something that I kind of looked for during the interview process, but I'm also very glad that I have in this current position.
I think looking across the responses of all of our panelists, what really comes through is really thinking about kind of who am I, what kind of work do I want to do, and what kind of impact do I want to have, and then reflecting on if our context, if our department or our school is a force multiplier in helping us be that person and achieve those goals. Like, I think that's really, we heard words like support, am I able to do the work I want to do, and those types of things. And so I think that's probably part of that reflective process, is really thinking about, does my department, does my school present facilitators of me being able to do the work I want to do, or does it present barriers, or is it somewhere in the middle? And that probably is what has a great deal of influence on folks' decisions to stay where they are, to go elsewhere. I think that's a really good question, Christine, and I think hopefully there's a good answer in there for you, something helpful for you. Any other questions from folks who are on the line with us? And Christine, you're welcome to jump back in as well.
I mean, I'm good. I just wanted to say thank you all so much for sharing so openly. It has been really great to hear all of your different perspectives on what it's like and how you got where you're going. It's just been tremendously helpful.
Great. I want to thank all the panelists as well. And keeping in mind that this learning community and all the learning community gatherings we've had, kind of one of the points I try to iterate and reiterate again and again, is that this is not intended to start and cease at the start and end time of these calls, that we're really trying to foster these connections among folks. So please, if you found any connections with other people during our time together today, please do reach out to them via email and make those connections and collaborations. Thank you all so much. I want to give each one of our panelists one more opportunity. If there's anything else, any parting words of wisdom or anything else you want to say before we get off the line. Kendall, anything you wanted to contribute?
I'd just say good luck. I hope it goes well for you, those of you who are in this process. It's crazy, and but hopefully when you get to the other side, it's a little bit better.
I guess my only kind of parting bit of advice is, like, don't be afraid to ask questions and reach out to other folks in these positions, and use this kind of network that we have here in our own little CJ Scraw group, to connect with one another. So for sure, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm sure I can speak for others on the call as well, that we're all open to, to talking more about this. Like Jess said, it doesn't kind of start and end here.
Yeah, I'd say don't be scared, don't be nervous. It is not fun to go on the job market, but once you are on the other side, the reward is so high. So it's a great risk, great reward type of situation. So even if you're feeling really stressed about this stuff, just know that you will get through it and you will have a career that you enjoy.
Great, thank you.